No, absolutely not. I would not eat lab-grown meat because meat is not meant to be grown in a lab.
Why? If you want to be vegan, but just eat natural things.
I want to eat something that's real. That's the real thing that came from the earth, from the planet, that was actually intended for us to be eating, not out of a lab that's made of, I don't know what, made of chemicals, implanted with chips.
Hey, what is going on, guys? So today we're going to be discussing what seems to be a very high proportion of people who oppose lab-grown meat and plant-based meat who identify as conservative. I say what seems to be because I haven't been able to find any concrete data in the form of a survey or something confirming that a higher proportion of conservatives are opposed to plant-based meat or incoming lab-grown meat than, say, people who identify as progressives. However, in my experience, it does seem like this is the case, and many vegans I've talked to, including conservative ones, share this perception or intuition. I've covered anti-lab meat and plant-based people on my channel many times, and they are very often conservative. This only further reinforces my intuition here. Obviously, there exist progressives who oppose lab-grown and plant-based meat as well, but it does seem conservatives oppose them to a higher degree. When you think of this simply in regard to what it means to be a progressive or conservative, it intuitively makes sense to think that a conservative, somebody who by definition is averse to change or innovation, would be less likely to accept an innovation like plant-based meat or lab-grown meat compared to somebody like a progressive. And here's some data on the left-wing, right-wing divide in the US in regard to meat consumption from a 2018 Gallup poll. Overall, 5% of Americans consider themselves vegetarian, with another 3% considering themselves vegan. When we take a look at the ideological differences amongst this 5% of Americans that are vegetarian and 3% of Americans that are vegan, we find that 11% of liberals are vegetarian, whereas only 2% of conservatives are vegetarians. With this data alone, we can say that liberals are 5.5 times more likely to be vegetarian compared to conservatives. Something similar is observed in regard to vegans, with liberals being 2.5 times more likely to be vegan than conservatives. While I'm aware that the antithesis of a conservative isn't necessarily a liberal and more so a progressive, I still found this survey helpful, seeing as a sizable majority of people who identify as the progressive left describe their views as liberal. But anyway, I've noticed that as plant-based meat and lab-grown meat have become more of a topic of conversation, it's often conservatives that are vehemently opposed to both. To no surprise, much of their reasons for opposing plant-based meat and lab-grown meat are in the form of, I want the real thing, I don't want to eat something that is made in a lab or that isn't natural. And although they don't tend to say it explicitly as conservatives, it's clear another reason is that they just don't want change. I mean, they identify as conservatives after all. The part of the conservatives' opposition to lab-grown and plant-based meat, which is in the form of, oh, this isn't a lab or this isn't natural, is very ironic when you take into account that the meat they consume today is the product of artificial insemination and artificial selection. With this, we can conclude that lab-grown meat, plant-based meat, and traditional meat, which they claim is natural, actually all share the property of being unnatural. I've never seen a conservative who opposes lab-grown meat and plant-based meat for reasons of artificiality be challenged on this point in this way. Although I would love to see it. I mean, what would be the relevant difference such that one is natural and one is not natural? I speculate that as lab-grown meat is brought to scale and is equalized in pricing to traditional meat, reasons to go vegan will seem much more palatable to progressives rather than conservatives. Mainly because progressives are less likely to oppose new things and innovation, plus they're already more likely to be vegan anyway. I further speculate that as lab-grown meat becomes as accessible as plant-based meat, and many more people hop on, quote, the vegan train, the vegan movement's primary target of opposition will be conservatives. And this is also interesting to me because we can only assume that the health outcomes for lab meat will be very similar to the health outcomes for meat derived from animals, which conservatives love so much, seeing as lab meat is molecularly identical to traditional meat. And here's the more interesting part that I cannot wait to see unfold. With lab meat in comparison to traditional meat being more environmentally friendly, more in favor of animal rights, tasting the same, resulting in the same health outcomes, and being unnatural just like current meat is, what arguments will conservatives be able to provide in favor of consuming traditional meat over lab meat? Besides something really stupid like, ewy, ewy, that's new, I don't like newness. They are probably going to look incredibly f***ing stupid, but we'll see. If you're a conservative watching this video who is opposed to lab-grown meat, I'm curious what your reasoning would be for rejecting lab-grown meat over traditional meat given everything I mentioned before. So the premise that it's better for the animals, better for the environment, tastes the same, is just as healthy, costs the same, and is unnatural just like your current meat. I'm very excited to hear your response. And just in case you're a vegan watching who wonders how lab-grown meat can technically be considered vegan when it requires an animal, understand there are now animal-free means by which we can generate lab-grown meat. And even if there wasn't, lab-grown meat would at the very least still be better than traditional meat in regards to animal welfare. Meaning conservatives would still have to face the fact that lab meat is better for animals than traditional meat while trying to come up with reasons to oppose it. Anyway guys, that's the end of the video. If you'd like to be given a good idea of what one of these conservatives look like who oppose lab meat and will look like especially when lab meat is brought to scale, check out my video on Candace Owens addressing why she would never consume lab meat over traditional meat. There's even this other conservative who claims she would rather starve to death than consume plant-based meat. A genius for sure. Both of their reasoning is amazing. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. If you support my work and want to support me on Patreon, you can get early access to it by clicking the link in the pinned comment. And if you don't know, I do have a book going over most, if not all, the anti-vegan arguments you're going to hear online. You can get that as well by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude.
Fuck off, I don't want anything to do with you. Don't ever speak to me again. You're a fucking piece of shit.
Even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who's your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude,